The Social Dilemma, Netflix's hit documentary, has given us all a wake-up call about our use of tech, our relationship with our devices, and the way that we use social media. Is it time that we all accept that we've become addicted to these platforms? This week I also spoke to Adam Alter on my podcast Under the Skin. He wrote the book Irresistible, and as the title to the book suggests, we have lost the ability to choose whether or not we look at social media platforms, whether or not we look at our devices, whether or not they're continually at arm's length. And as the Social Dilemma documentary brilliantly demonstrates visually, on the other side of the screen you're looking at right now, are the equivalent of, well, I mean, there are countless engineers and genii manipulating your behavior. As Gerard Lanier, one of the talking heads on the documentary, an advocate for social media cancellation, says that the function, the product of social media platforms is the subtle manipulation of your attention. They are selling the subtle manipulation of your attention. In short, we're becoming addicted to these products, to these platforms. Addiction means a behavior that has negative consequences, and when you try to stop it, you can't.
We get rewarded by hearts, likes, thumbs up, and we conflate that with value, and we conflate it with truth.
A whole generation is more anxious, more depressed.
I always felt like fundamentally it was a force for good. I don't know if I feel that way anymore.
The story that I thought the documentary expertly told was how many observable social and individual problems can be traced to the advent of immersive social media. I like the data on self-harm and the increase of self-harm in young females was the example that it gave, the increase in suicide rates. And what I was left with is a picture of a world where we're all under continual surveillance with the somewhat insidious intention of marketing to us ever more efficiently. Now, of course, the intention to make us units of profitability has existed long before social media. It's simply the application of a pre-existing mentality into a landscape that is growing exponentially and becoming more and more efficient. We are approaching the point where most people accept their use of their tech devices, their use of social media is beyond them to control, is beyond their control, is beyond the ability to choose. We're at the point of having to accept that we are addicted, i.e. we don't want to look, but we look. We don't want to pick up the phone, but we pick up the phone. I've started turning mine off. You know, I remember thinking it was remarkable when Steve Jobs spoke about, oh, you know, we make it impossible for them to be turned off, you know, iPhones obviously in particular in this case. And some rather romantic allusions were made to that being because of his dislike of death, his aversion to death, that the device has to continually be active. But of course, really, it means that we're accessible continually to the various resources and points of intention beyond it. Since watching that documentary and since having the conversation with Adam Alter, which by coincidence happened in the same week in my little life, I've started to turn my phone off more. I only go on social media platforms in a very constructed and conscious way now. I'm obviously in the privileged position that social media for me is part of my working life, so I can have literally a human shield between me and social media, passing on bits of content to me, things for me to respond on. As an addict who's had obviously addiction issues with more conventional substance addiction, behavioural addictions around pornography, sex, etc., I recognise in myself that when I stop using the phone, I start feeling anxious. Now, what this film did rather well is it explained why that would be, because there are people with incredible efficacy pursuing our attention. Our consciousness is the product, or more specifically, the manipulation of our consciousness is the product. I thought it was brilliant the way that it connected this new phenomena with the rise of polemicism and conflict in the social sphere, the bifurcation of the political landscape, the inability of people on different parts of the political spectrum to communicate with one another. And the exciting news that I have for you is that the solution to chemical dependency is applicable in this situation. Of course, it's different from drugs and alcohol. If you are a drug addict or an alcoholic, you have to, one way of doing it is one day at a time to stop drinking and stop using. I would say with tech addiction, a period of detoxification would be simple. There is that simple maxim in the world of addiction. If you want to know if you're addicted to something or not, see what happens to you when you stop using it. If you think, I'm not addicted to my phone, look at what happens to you if you for 1 week try not to look at your phone. See what it does to you. See what feelings you feel, because those were the feelings that were being controlled. As it observes very expertly in the film, we are not evolved to have access to social approval at the end of our arm. More broadly than the remit of this documentary, more broadly than the remit of the subject of this review, have long believed that what we must do is emulate the conditions of our anthropological origin. I'm not suggesting, of course, that we go back to living in caves, but I am suggesting that we acknowledge we are designed to live in smaller groups, not designed, evolved, designed to mean a different Weltanschauung altogether, different perspective altogether. But we have evolved to have 50 relationships or 70 relationships, not to live in vast, overwhelming cities, not to be confronted with See, the reason that diversity has begun to cause such strife and conflict is because people are, in an abstract way, confronted with opinions that they don't agree with after being ossified in the oft-spoken of bubbles of communication. You're confronted with someone who's got an entirely different view of sexuality or identity or gender or politics. Ultimately, we need to live in communities where there is a shared intention, where our shared intention would once have been survival. Now, in the kind of communities that you and I live in, presuming you're not watching this in desperation under a rock while being, bombed in Syria, the kind of communities we live in, most of our basic needs have been met. But what are not being met are our psychological and spiritual needs. We are continually being estranged from our spirit, from who we really are. Please don't think of that as woo-woo. If it helps you, look at it in anthropological terms. We're designed to have close bonds with a group of people. We're designed to have a close bond with nature, a relationship with our own intuition. We're hugely capable and powerful beings. In that brilliant documentary that I'll do a review on soon, that octopus documentary, your man talks about the trackers that he worked with in some country in Africa and their ability to read natural signs. I had a wonderful conversation once with Gabor Mate, who talked about the occupants of some South Pacific archipelago, where they would go out in their canoes and navigate journeys of thousands of kilometers, reading their destination and direction from the movements of birds, the patterns in the water, the movements of fish. Now, this is no replacement for technology, for radar, for GPS, but it does show we have these great capacities within us that are laying dormant so that we can simply become passive consumers. This is a highly politically charged situation because we are in the thrall of powerful economic interests that will not change without regulation. I don't believe that meaningful regulation will ever be imposed because these Silicon Valley giants work often in harmony with governments. Look at the revelations of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and the consequences that both those people suffered as a result. It is unlikely that the kind of regulation required for tech companies for it to be healthy for us as individuals to use them, that those regulations will ever be applied is risible, and it's certainly a long way off. Look how slow we are to respond to fossil fuels. Look how long it's taken us to go, do you know what, we probably shouldn't be doing that anymore. We've got to find a different way of doing it. Now, I suppose that does place some onus on us as individuals. We're going to need programs around the way we use tech. And what I mean by a program is a system of awakening, a system for keeping yourself in the moment so that you don't become a mark for the powerful interest that will control your consciousness, whether for political or for commercial ends, none of which will ultimately suit you. We need to awaken in our own lives. We need to recognize that unless we have genuine power, meaningful purchase in our own existence, then what are we? What are we? We have to start to recognize, where does our identity come from? What does the thing we perceive, what is underwriting the thing we perceive ourselves to be? I had a wonderful conversation with Satish Kumar. He said, no social justice without environmental justice, that we are still in the thrall of the individual identity. The great Zazen, or possibly Tao master Banquo, said, we are too partial to ourselves. We have become partial to ourselves, to this construct. If you've seen that documentary, The Social Dilemma, you'll see the brilliant visual metaphor it uses of the, the kid, expertly acted by that young gentleman, like being manipulated by the three sort of behind the scenes personified algorithms, as it were. Now, this is continually happening even in our own consciousness. All things that happen externally are an emulation of some internal practice. We are creating an object in our own mind, an image of ourselves. I have an image of myself. I can have this happen. I can say this. I can't do this. I can't do that. I identify with this. I distance myself from that. The whole thing is a construct. Any one of us could become each other. Any one of us can identify with each other. We can overcome this sense of alienation and oppositionism if we learn to identify with our deeper awareness, if we learn to observe what we believe to be ourselves. I know this from chemical dependency. I didn't give up drugs. I gave up the person that was addicted to drugs. Once I gave up that person, the drugs was no longer a problem. The solutions will be comparable with tech addiction. We have to recognize what role is tech playing in our lives. How else can we have these needs fulfilled when in fact these needs are not being successfully fulfilled, because they cannot be fulfilled. They are ultimately tools for stimulating consumer behavior. I want to give props to that dude Tristan Harris from Google for his excellent humane tech deal that he's pursuing. Jaron Lanier, all these people, they're coming on this podcast. I've not even asked, well, Jaron Lanier, we asked him ages ago, but we're going to get them all on. Lynn Fox from the PR at Apple, Jeff Sieber, who else did I like? I liked her with the big hair and all. Where was she from? Stanford or Yale? I don't remember her name, but she was amazing. And Jonathan Haidt, he's coming on here. What amazing work these people have done in observing the exponential growth of tech and what these platforms are doing. The platform that you're watching on right now, the platform that I'll be watching later on today, but in a much more mindful way, is that they are so refined in aggregating our behavior and making subtle, incremental, increasingly rapid improvements that we have no choice at all in how we use these products. You could say similar things have happened with sugar and fat and the kind of foods that wouldn't be in our diets in the conditions of our anthropological origin. In terms of solution, we must individually awaken, and then beyond that we need to create communities that are in harmony with our anthropological origin. I'm not talking about some mad, noble, savage idealism. I'm talking about tech, yes. Medicine, yes. Diverse belief systems and means of identification, of course, but with the awareness that we are apes, that we have to somehow regard and respect our limitations as animals while reaching to our inner potential and the kind of cultures and societies that we could create if we were liberated even for a moment from the intentions, not necessarily malevolent, simply evolved intentions of powerful, dominant elites that continually want to mold and manipulate our behavior in the world of tech, but prior to that, in the world of energy consumption, and prior to that, in industry, prior to that, agriculture. This tendency has always been present in us, but what is awakening if it isn't becoming aware of the reality you're living in and the possibility of creating a new one? All these tools designed for our spiritual imprisonment can be rebooted and redirected towards our awakening and alignment. I believe that. I'm learning how to do it as an individual, and if I can do it with all my limitations and flaws and failings, then surely all of us can do it together.